The title of my sermon this morning is A Reason to Believe. A Reason to Believe. It seems to me that, as a society, we're becoming more and more sensitive to being politically correct. And probably one of the best examples is around this time of year, the kerfuffle that happens whether or not we're allowed to say to someone, Merry Christmas, right? From the issue of the controversy over the red cups, at Starbucks, at Timmy's, all the way to a New Jersey councilwoman back in 2015, the city put on a tree lighting ceremony that they called a Christmas tree lighting ceremony. But because she was offended that they used the word Christmas, she resigned as the New Jersey councilwoman. And although this sounds a little bit silly, I can hear the chuckles. It kind of made me chuckle a little bit. This is the kind of society we live in, whether we like it or not. Steve Turner, he's an English journalist. He wrote a poem that I think captures where our culture is so well that I'm going to share it with you this morning. We're going to read it together. This is kind of my abridged version. It is longer, but I've kind of shortened it. Kind of. Bear with me. It's very good, though. You have to listen to every line this guy writes is so heavy and so full of meaning. I just had to share this with you this morning. Probably one of the best poems I've heard, just kind of letting us know where we stand or where we are, or where the common mindset is of our society today. So he begins this way. This is called Creed by Steve Turner. We believe in Marx, Freud, and Darwin. It's got to have three, right, mixed into one. Karl Marx, you have Sigmund Freud, and Charles Darwin, right? He says, we believe everything is okay as long as you don't hurt anyone, to the best of your definition of hurt and to the best of your knowledge. Okay? We believe that everything's getting better, despite evidence to the contrary. The evidence must be investigated, and you can prove anything with evidence. He goes on to say, we believe there's something in horoscopes, UFOs, and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man like Buddha, Muhammad, and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, though we think his good morals were bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same. At least the ones we read are. They all believe in love and goodness. They only differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. What's left? We believe that after death comes the nothing. Because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. We believe in total disarmament. We believe there are direct links, this will blow your mind. We believe there are direct links between warfare and bloodshed. I had no idea. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behavior that lets him down. This is the fault of society. Society is the fault of conditions. Conditions are the fault of society. And around we go. He says, we believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him. This is very key. We believe that each man or woman must find the truth that is right for him. Reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust. Oh, really? History will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth except for the truth that there is no absolute truth. Finally, he says, if chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, troops on rampage, whites go looting, bomb blast school, it is but the sound of man worshiping his maker. That's deep. That is very profound. Probably the best poem I've ever heard that captures where we are mentally, at least in North America, the Western world. As our culture becomes more and more secular, it brings with it a philosophical naturalism, a materialistic worldview, which basically is trying to explain everything around us without God. Everything is by chance. And as Turner puts it, if chance be the father of all flesh, how can I explain to someone that they have value? How can I explain to someone, if we're just here by chance, that there is a purpose to your life? Is this skepticism a new thing? In order to find that out, we're going to take a look at a story in the book of Luke in your Bibles. Why Luke? Because Luke has a very interesting perspective to Jesus Christ and to the gospel. Because he is a doctor, and you will find out why in just a moment. But let's dive right in. Let's look in our Bibles or your tablets, your phones, find Luke chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. We'll start there. Luke chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. It begins by saying, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us." Verse 2, "Just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught." Right in chapter 3, Luke is kind of telling us, listen, these are 4 things I want you to know about the book that I'm about to write, before he even tells you why he's writing the book. Let's look at those 4 reasons. I'm kind of moving backwards. The first one, he says he's going all the way back to that's number 2, I'm sorry. Number 1 is he investigated the story. He investigated the story. He didn't just copy it from someone else who gave it to him and just dictate it. No, he went and he studied it for himself. Number 2, he went back to the beginning. He is the only gospel writer that includes 2 birth stories. 2 birth stories. Some of the other gospel writers start with Jesus. Others have John the Baptist and Jesus when they're full grown. Luke is the only one that goes all the way back before Jesus was born to a birth that happened before Jesus Christ came on the scene. Number 3, Luke studied, he said, everything. It's interesting to note that the book of Luke, 30% of the book of Luke is found nowhere else in the gospel or the Bible, including some of the parables that Jesus told. He is a very unique gospel writer. And finally, he says that he worked carefully. Now, it says that this book was written for a man named Theophilus. Really, we don't know who Theophilus was. Some commentators and some scholars say he was probably a new Christian who was very wealthy. And so he sponsored Luke to write this book. Listen, I've been hearing a lot of things. I would love for you to investigate. You're a doctor. This is what you do. You investigate. Come to me and tell me what you find about this Jesus Christ. So we don't know who he is, but his name, incidentally, means the love of God. That's just an interesting point. But in Luke chapter 1, verse 4, he tells us now why he's writing the book. And I thought this is very interesting. New International Version, the one I just read to you, says that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. That you may know the certainty. The Message, paraphrase, says it this way. It kind of breaks it down very, very well, kind of easy to understand. It says, so you can know beyond the shadow of a doubt the reliability of the things that you were taught. It sounds to me that Luke is letting us know that the skepticism that we deal with today is nothing new. People wanted to know truth just as much back then as they do today. According to Steve Turner, though, in our culture, there is no such thing as absolute truth. So don't bother investigating, right? One of the 4 horsemen of the new atheist, Sam Harris is one of them, and one of the more famous ones you probably heard is Richard Dawkins. Listen to this quote. This should pique your curiosity. Richard Dawkins, the man himself, says, "Faith is the great cop-out. the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. He says faith is belief in spite of, or even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. Basically, he's saying if you are a person who believes in the Bible and believes in God and believes in miracles, you are subpar intellectually. You're not very bright. And this is one of the more less offensive things that I could put on the screen for you to read today. I mean, the four horsemen, the new atheists, are really strong against Christian thought and faith. But this man is a scientist. He has a materialistic worldview. He's a naturalist. Everything that he sees in his world, he wants to test by seeing, by feeling, by using his senses to determine whether it's a fact. He needs to test it to make sure it's true. Luke is a doctor. And I think that's very interesting because back in first century Palestine, this was as close as you could get to a scientist. He's not taking a religious point of view. He is using his skills as a doctor. Scholars still can't decide whether or not he was a Christian or he was a Jew or not. Many of them overwhelmingly say that he was not a Jew. So he's coming at this from a scientific viewpoint. I want to study, I want to investigate, and I want to come to conclusions. That's why we have the book of Luke today. So, let's find out what he says, continuing in his book. Luke chapter 1, we're going to go from 5 to 13. Follow along if you have it with you. He says, in the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zachariah, who belonged to the priest division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Once when Zachariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. Verse 10, and when the time for the burning of the incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel told him, "Do not be afraid, Zachariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." Something interesting, like I mentioned before about Luke, is that he starts not with the birth of Christ. He starts with the birth of John the Baptist. I think that's because, yes, even though John was a forerunner to Jesus Christ, there is something in this story that sets the stage for the story of Jesus Christ to come just another chapter later. In the story we read here about Zacharias, God picks an incredible moment in the life and career of Zechariah to make his kind of divine move. According to Josephus, he's a first century Jewish historian, Zechariah the priest was a member of one of 24 divisions of priests, which means that he was one of approximately 20,000 priests. The chances of him serving in the temple, it's every priest's dream to serve in the temple on behalf of God. But the chances of the lot falling on you when there's 20,000 of you are very rare. So he is so excited to be in the synagogue and the church and the temple and just kind of worshiping and being that intercessor between God and the people. Which leads me to point number 1 of our time this morning. God's timing is perfect. I can see that, I can almost see the irony and the joy here. It's hard to imagine because I haven't been in his shoes, but you can imagine he's so excited that he can do this for the first time and maybe the only time in his life. And while he's fulfilling his dream of serving in the temple, an angel appears and says, "Oh, by the way, you think this is good news? Guess what? You're going to have a little boy." And can you imagine how excited he was? Elizabeth, his wife, down in verse 25, I think. Yes, verse 25, she refers to the fact that she didn't have a baby yet as a disgrace. And so imagine how she feels knowing, hey, I'm not going to be a disgrace anymore. God's going to give me a baby. Maybe there are some of you here today who can completely relate and understand Zechariah and Elizabeth. Maybe you've been waiting for God for a long time. You've been waiting on him to come through for you. Maybe you've even felt like a disgrace in your own community because of a condition you can't control. And the longer you live, you realize that you don't have to be a bad person for bad things to happen to you. Sometimes life is just unfair. The story is encouraging, though, because it tells us something, right? It tells us that perhaps the best moment in your life is still to come. And there is a good chance, though, that it might not come in the way that you expect it. But here's the point. Don't lose hope. With God, all things are possible. This is a story for you to be encouraged because of that. Let's keep reading now Zechariah's response, verses 18 to 22. It says, Zechariah asked the angel, how can I be sure of this? I'm an old man and my wife is well along in years. The angel said to him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens, because what? You did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time. Verse 21, meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering why he stayed so long in the temple. When he came out, he could not speak to them. They realized he had seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them, but remained unable to speak. After a priest was done his work in the temple, he would come out and lift his hands and pronounce a blessing over the people that came to the door of the temple. He would just kind of pray over them and give them God's blessing. They would recite something from Numbers 6 over the people. At this time, he's taking way too long. People are starting to look at each other like, okay, it's, time is going on. What is he doing? Why hasn't he come out yet? Finally, this man comes stumbling out of the temple, and he's flailing his arms. It's like he's doing charades. It sounds like you got two syllables. He's trying to act. And people are like, well, why doesn't he just say something? And the more this is going on, the more they realize, wait a minute, something happened in there. Why is he both deaf and mute? The Bible tells us why. It's because he did not, what? Believe. Which leads me to point number 2 this morning. You can know a lot and still not believe. Just from the text back in verse 6, we know a few things about Zechariah the priest. 1, he kept the commandments of God. Number 2, he knew the requirements of the Lord. Number 3, he was blameless. Number 4, he believed in prayer. Number 5, he was the priest. And knowing all the things that he knew, he still didn't believe. How ironic. How ironic. And sometimes I think that you and I, if we were born in the church, we've probably been to a number of Revelation seminars. We know 1844. We know the health message. We know the sanctuary. We know all that stuff. When we come to church every week, we maybe don't even miss a week coming to church. And we can still fall in the trap of knowing all that and still not believing. Believing in what? What are you talking about? What do you mean, believe? What? Here are some examples. Number 1, believe that God is actually real. I know that sounds strange, but how many people come to church week after week thinking that God is just out there, I don't know, he might not even come back a second time. Or perhaps that he has the power to change your life and your circumstances. Maybe the life of someone you look at and you would say, there is no way this person would ever change. Maybe it is to believe that God can still perform miracles today. You could fill in the blanks. I imagine that for Zachariah and Elizabeth, they prayed many times for a child. I bet you they fasted and prayed. They came to every Willowdale first of the month fasting and prayer session. I mean, they were just, and they're starting to get older, and they're starting to look at each other like, what's going on here? And then the doctor tells them, look, I'm sorry. It seems like a child wasn't the will of God for you guys. I imagine the tears and the wrestling bouts with God. Did I do something wrong? I'm a priest. I thought I was following. What's going on? Am I to blame? And slowly but surely, doubt crept in. Sometimes good people have disappointments in their life too. Just because you give your life to Christ and you become a Christian doesn't mean that you will never face disappointments. It doesn't mean that once in a while you may even begin to doubt. Doubt may creep in. Which leads me to our third and final point, just kind of a wake-up call. Doubt is the enemy's greatest weapon. I believe that it is Satan's greatest mission to get you and me to doubt the authenticity of the Bible. Because the Bible has stories in it. It has miracles in it. And if you begin to doubt, the miracles didn't really happen, guess what? You begin to doubt that God can perform a miracle in your life today. The miracle of rebirth, the miracle of transformation, the miracle of freedom from guilt, and the peace that comes with that. I found it very interesting. I found out this week, some of you know who this man is, Larry King. From Larry King Live, probably one of the most famous talk show hosts ever. I mean, you name it, he's interviewed them. He's interviewed the who's who of politics, of acting, Hollywood, you name it, all over the place. And what I found interesting is that someone went up to him and said, Larry, listen, you've interviewed a lot of people in this world, a lot of people over your years. I want to ask you a question. If you had the choice to interview anybody you wish in all of history, who would it be? And what is the one question you would ask that person? Most of you already know what I'm about to say, don't you? Tell me, who is the person he would like to interview? Jesus. Larry King. From what I know, he is not a Christian. He doesn't go to church. He's as secular as they come. And he said, I would love to interview Jesus Christ. Of anybody in history, can you guess what is the one question he would ask Jesus Christ? Some of you may be surprised at this. He said, I would love to ask Jesus this question. Were you really born of a virgin? You see, for Larry King, that question is all he needs to give him a reason to believe. If he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt from Jesus' mouth himself, yes, miracles do happen. I was born of a virgin woman. If that answer clicks in his mind, he has every reason to believe. And I found it very interesting that Larry King said this. Now, even though we are looking at Luke chapter 1 and the story of John the Baptist this morning, a story probably less talked about during the Christmas season, it is a story that happens right before the birth of Christ, and I believe it's documented to give us a reason to believe this Christmas. A story written by a doctor who studied the evidence carefully and uses this story to set up what comes in chapter 2, the greatest story ever told, the birth and life and death of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Over the next week, I want to challenge you to do one thing. If you find yourself in a lull moment at work, in a waiting room, maybe in an airport going somewhere warm and sunny, take out your phone or your Bible, and I want to challenge you to read through the Christmas story in the book of Luke. Just the book of Luke. See it from his perspective. Perhaps it may inspire you. Perhaps it may give you a reason to believe once again. I began this morning by sharing with you a poem by Steve Turner. And as a comparison to that poem, I want to close with another poem. This poem is drastically different than that poem. It's written by a man named Hardy Shaw. He was a World War I combat infantry soldier, and he wrote this letter, and they found it buried inside of his coat pocket. And I want you to just kind of follow along as I read and see the difference in this man's poem. He writes, "Lord God, I have never spoken to you, but now I want to say, how do you do? You see, God, they told me you didn't exist. And like a fool, I believed all this. Last night from a shell hole, I saw your sky. I figured right then they had told me a lie. Had I taken time to see the things you made, I'd have known they weren't calling a spade a spade. I wonder, God, if you'll take my hand. Somehow I feel that you'll understand. Funny I had to come to this hellish place before I had time to see your face. Well, I guess there isn't much more to say, but I'm sure glad, God, I met you today. The signal. Well, God, I'll have to go. I like you lots. I want you to know. Strange now that I've met you, I'm not afraid to die." This man wrote this on a letter, on just a piece of paper, and he put it into his coat pocket. The signal went, he climbed over the mound, and he died. In contrast with the poem at the beginning, I believe this man knew what peace was in a world that is struggling to find it. Maybe you're here for the very first time today. Maybe you've never walked into a church in your life. Maybe you are a bit skeptical too of God and religion and this whole church thing, and I want to tell you, it's okay. You are welcome here. Or maybe you've spent your whole life knowing the truths about Christianity, knowing the truths about Christmas and the Bible, but because it seems like God just hasn't been answering your prayers lately, you begin to doubt if He really exists, if miracles still can happen, and doubt kind of creeps in slowly into your heart. Or maybe you're just a young person here today who needs some reassurance when everyone at school and everyone around you thinks that you're dumb for believing in God. Luke wrote his book with you in mind, and I challenge you to read it. Don't lose hope. Give God a chance this Christmas season. Reread the greatest story ever told, for in it you will find Jesus Christ, and you will also find a reason to believe. Merry Christmas, and God bless.